The glass shattered against the wall before Elena Voss even realized she had thrown it. "You did what?" she said, her voice shaking with a fury she had never shown her father before. Gareth Voss did not flinch. He stood behind his heavy oak desk, his hands folded, his face carved from stone. He had faced down rival alphas and blood feuds without blinking, yet he could not meet his daughter's eyes now. "I signed the agreement this morning," he said. "It is done, Elena. You leave for Thornhollow territory at dawn. You traded me." Her words came out flat, disbelieving, like I am a bag of grain, like I am a piece of land you no longer wanted. "It is not like that." "Then tell me what it is like." She stepped closer, her hands trembling at her sides. "Tell me how handing your only daughter to a rival pack, without asking her, without warning her, is anything other than a trade." Gareth exhaled slowly. Outside the study window, the last light of evening painted the pine forest of Ashwood territory, in deep orange, the color of a world about to change. He had rehearsed this conversation for days, and still the words would not come easily. "The Thornhollow pack has grown strong," he said, "stronger than us. For 3 years, we have lived on the edge of war with them, and every season, it becomes harder to hold that edge. This agreement ends the war before it begins. It brings peace. And what does it bring me?" He did not answer. Elena turned away from him, pressing her palm against the cool glass of the window. Somewhere out there, beyond the tree line, was a life she had never asked for and could not refuse. In the world of shifters, agreements between packs were rarely questioned, especially not by the daughters of Betas. She had grown up understanding that her life belonged, in some measure, to the pack, but she had never imagined it would be handed away so completely, so suddenly, without even the courtesy of a warning. "Who asked for me?" she said quietly. "Specifically, did Alpha King Damian Wolf himself demand this, or was it his council?" "The terms came directly from the Thornhollow stronghold," Gareth said. "I do not know more than that." "You do not know," Elena repeated, turning back to face him. "You signed away my life to a man you have never met, based on terms you do not fully understand. I signed to protect this pack, including you. Do not pretend this protects me." Her voice cracked, just slightly, before she caught it and steadied herself. She would not cry in front of him, not tonight. The Ashwood pack was not small, but it was not powerful either. For generations it had survived by staying quiet, by avoiding the notice of larger packs, by keeping to its forests and its rivers, and asking nothing of the world beyond its borders. That peace had held until 3 years ago, when Thornhollow warriors began patrolling closer and closer to Ashwood land, when tension crackled through every pack meeting like static before a storm. Elena had heard the rumors about Thornhollow's alpha. Some called him ruthless, a king who had clawed his way to power through sheer will. Others whispered that he was fair, even generous, though demanding absolute loyalty from those who served him. She did not know which version was true. She only knew that tomorrow she would find out for herself, whether she wanted to or not. "There is still time," her father said, softer now. "Pack your things. Rest if you can. Colin will escort you with 2 others at first light." "Rest," Elena said, almost laughing. "You want me to rest?" She left the study without another word, her footsteps echoing down the stone hallway of the pack house. Portraits of past alphas and betas lined the walls, generations of Ashwood leadership staring down at her with painted, unmoving eyes. She wondered if any of them had ever been asked to give up everything for the sake of peace, or if that particular sacrifice had been saved for her alone. Her bedroom felt smaller than she remembered, though nothing in it had changed. The same faded quilt on the bed, the same shelf of worn books, the same window overlooking the training yard where she had spent countless mornings learning to fight alongside the pack's warriors. She was not helpless. She reminded herself of that as she pulled a leather bag from beneath her bed and began folding clothes into it with sharp, angry movements. Whatever waited for her at Thornhollow, she would not arrive as a frightened girl. She would arrive as herself. A knock sounded at her door, before it opened without waiting for an answer. Her closest friend, Marin, slipped inside, her eyes wide with worry. "Is it true?" Marin asked. "The whole pack house is talking about it." "It's true." Elena did not stop packing. "I leave in the morning." "Elena." Marin crossed the room and caught her hands, stilling them. "This is not right. You cannot just be sent away like this. What choice do I have? Elena finally looked up, and the exhaustion in her eyes surprised even her. My father has made his decision. The council has approved it. There is no one left to appeal to. Then run, Marin whispered. Tonight, I will help you. For one wild moment, Elena considered it. She pictured herself slipping into the forest under cover of darkness, disappearing into territory unclaimed by any pack, living free of expectations and treaties, and men who decided her fate over cups of tea in locked studies. But the fantasy collapsed as quickly as it had formed. Running would not protect Ashwood. It would only unravel the fragile peace her father had bought with her future, and it would leave her family to face Thornhollow's anger alone. I can't, she said. If I run, the treaty falls apart. My father has already committed the pact to this. If I disappear, Thornhollow will see it as a betrayal, and everyone here will pay for my choice. Marin's jaw tightened, but she did not argue further. She understood, even if she hated it. Then I will pray you find something good on the other side of this. Whatever that pack is, whatever their king is like, I hope he sees what the rest of us already know, that you are not something to be traded. You are someone worth knowing. Elena managed a small, tired smile. I hope so too. They packed together in silence after that, folding dresses and boots and small keepsakes into the leather bag, until the room held nothing left to give. When Marin finally left, wrapping Elena in a fierce hug at the door, Elena sat alone on the edge of her bed and allowed herself, for just a few minutes, to feel the full weight of what tomorrow would bring. She did not sleep that night. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind move through the pines outside her window, trying to imagine the man she was being sent to. Alpha King Damian Wolf. The title alone carried weight. Not simply an alpha, but a king, a title given to few in the shifter world, reserved only for those whose strength and influence stretched far beyond a single pack's territory. What kind of man earned a title like that? What kind of man demanded a beta's daughter as tribute for peace? She pictured him cold and calculating, a man who saw people as pieces on a board to be moved and traded as it suited his ambitions. She pictured him cruel, the kind of alpha whose warriors spoke his name with fear rather than respect. By the time gray light began creeping through her window, she had built an entire portrait of a man she had never met, and she hated every version of him equally. At dawn she rose, dressed in simple traveling clothes, and carried her bag down to the courtyard, where 3 guards waited, with horses saddled and ready. Her father stood near the gate, his expression unreadable. She did not go to him. She could not yet, not when her anger still burned so close to the surface. Instead, she walked directly to the lead guard, a steady, quiet man named Colin who had known her since childhood, and nodded once. I'm ready, she said, though the words felt like a lie even as she spoke them. Colin studied her for a moment, something like sympathy flickering across his weathered face. It's a 2-day ride to Thornhollow territory, he said. We'll make camp tonight, along the ridge trail. Try to rest when you can. I will try. Her father approached then, and for a moment she thought he might apologize, might explain himself in a way that finally made sense of what he had done. Instead, he simply said, Be strong, Elena. Whatever waits for you there, remember who you are and where you come from. I intend to, she said, and mounted her horse without looking back at him again. The gates of Ashwood territory opened, and Elena rode out into a morning mist that clung to the forest floor, like something unwilling to let go. Behind her lay everything familiar. Ahead lay a stranger who had, for reasons she could not begin to understand, decided her life belonged to him now. They traveled in near silence through the first hours of the morning, the horses picking their way along a worn trail that wound between towering pines and moss-covered stone. Elena kept her eyes forward, refusing to look back toward the pack house even after it had long disappeared behind the trees. She had cried enough tears the night before. She would not give the forest any more of them. By midday, the guards allowed a short rest near a stream, and Elena dismounted to stretch her legs and splash cool water on her face. It was there, crouched at the water's edge, that she noticed the way Colin and the 2 younger guards exchanged glances when they thought she was not watching. A quick look, a subtle shake of the head, the kind of silent communication that passed between people who knew something they were not supposed to share. What is it? She asked, straightening. Nothing, Colin said too quickly. Colin. She fixed him with a look that had, on more than one occasion, gotten the truth out of stubborn pack members twice her size. Tell me. He hesitated, glancing at the other guards before lowering his voice. There's talk, that's all. Among the warriors who carried messages back and forth during the treaty negotiations. Talk that this arrangement wasn't exactly what it seemed on paper. Elena's stomach tightened. What do you mean? I mean the terms didn't come from Thornhollow's council, the way your father might have implied. They came directly from the Alpha King himself. And from what I heard, he was very specific about who he wanted. Specific how? Colin shifted uncomfortably. He asked for you. By name. Not just any daughter of a Beta family. You. The words landed strangely, settling into Elena's chest with a weight she could not immediately understand. She had assumed, without ever questioning it, that she had been offered up by her own pack as a convenient sacrifice, one daughter among several possible choices, selected simply because her father held enough status to make the gesture meaningful. The idea that Damian Wolf had asked for her specifically, by name, was something else entirely. It did not soften her anger. If anything, it sharpened it into something more pointed, more personal. Why would he ask for me, she said slowly, when he has never met me? None of the guards had an answer for that, and after a moment, they mounted their horses again and continued on, the silence between them now carrying a different kind of weight. Elena rode with her mind turning over the new information, again and again, searching for some explanation that made sense. Had he seen her at some pack gathering she did not remember, some council meeting where she had stood quietly in her father's shadow? Was this some strategic move designed to humiliate Ashwood specifically through her? Or was there something else at work, something she could not yet name? They made camp that evening on a ridge overlooking a wide valley, the sky above turning deep shades of purple and gold as the sun set behind distant mountains. Elena sat near the fire, wrapped in a wool blanket, staring into the flames, while the guards spoke quietly among themselves a short distance away. Tomorrow she would cross into Thornhollow territory. Tomorrow she would meet the man who had reshaped her entire future with nothing more than a name, spoken during treaty negotiations. She thought of her father's words, "Remember who you are, and where you come from." She intended to, whatever waited for her beyond these mountains, whatever kind of man this Alpha King turned out to be, she would not arrive broken. She would arrive as Elena Voss, daughter of Ashwood, and she would decide for herself what kind of life she was willing to accept. Sleep came slowly that night, pulling her under in fragments between long stretches of staring up at unfamiliar stars. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were filled with golden eyes she had never seen, and a voice she had never heard, calling her name across some distance she could not measure. She woke before dawn, unsettled and unable to explain why, and lay watching the sky lighten while the fire burned down to embers beside her. By the time the guards stirred and began breaking camp, Elena had made peace with one simple truth. Whatever waited for her at Thornhollow, she would face it with her head held high. She had not asked for this. She had not chosen this path, but she would walk it as herself, and no Alpha King, however powerful his title, would change that. They rode out, as the sun crested the mountains, the trail growing steeper as it climbed toward the border that separated Ashwood territory from Thornhollow's vast holdings. Somewhere beyond that border, in a stronghold she had never seen, a king waited who had asked for her by name. Elena did not know what he wanted from her, or why he had reached across pack lines to claim a woman he had never met. She only knew that by the end of this day, she would finally have her answer. The border between Ashwood and Thornhollow territory was marked by nothing more than a shallow river, yet crossing it felt like stepping into an entirely different world. Elena noticed the change immediately. The trees grew taller here, older, their trunks wide enough that 3 people could not have wrapped their arms around them. The air carried a different scent, sharper, wilder, thick with the presence of a pack far larger than her own. Warriors patrolled the tree line in pairs, their eyes tracking the small traveling party with open suspicion. "Stay close," Colin murmured, guiding his horse nearer to hers. "And let me do the talking if anyone stops us." They were stopped within the hour. 4 Thornhollow warriors emerged from the trees ahead, blocking the trail with the casual confidence of men who knew this land belonged to them completely. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a scar cutting across his jaw, studied the group with narrowed eyes before his gaze settled on Elena. "You're the one from Ashwood," he said. It was not a question. "I am Elena Voss," she said, refusing to let her voice waver. Something shifted in his expression, though she could not read exactly what. "The king has been expecting you. We'll escort you the rest of the way." The stronghold itself appeared an hour later, rising from the forest like something built by giants. Elena had grown up in a modest pack house, sturdy but simple, built more for function than grandeur. Thornhollow's stronghold was something else entirely. Stone walls stretched high enough to disappear into the morning mist, and beyond the outer gate she could see a sprawling compound of buildings, training grounds, and gardens that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Word of her arrival had clearly traveled ahead of her. As the party passed through the gates, pack members paused in their work to watch, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open assessment. Elena kept her chin lifted and her shoulders square, refusing to let the weight of so many eyes bend her posture. They were met in the central courtyard by a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. "I am Freya," she said, "the king's second. He asked me to bring you to him directly." "Now?" Elena had expected time to settle, to wash the dust of travel from her skin, to prepare herself mentally for whatever confrontation awaited. Freya's small, almost sympathetic smile suggested she understood. "He is not a patient man when it comes to matters he considers important," Freya said. "And you, it seems, are considered very important." Elena's guards were led away to be given quarters and food, and she found herself walking alone beside Freya, through corridors lined with tall windows that let in streams of morning light. The stronghold was as impressive inside as it had been from without, though she noticed something she had not expected. It did not feel cold or oppressive, the way she had imagined a king's court might feel. There was warmth here, evidence of a pack that lived and worked and laughed within these walls, not merely served. "You seem surprised," Freya observed, noticing Elena's careful study of her surroundings. "I expected something different," Elena admitted. "Most people do, before they meet him." They stopped before a set of heavy wooden doors, and Freya knocked twice before pushing them open, without waiting for a response. "Elena Voss has arrived, my king." Elena stepped into the room, her heart hammering against her ribs, despite every effort to remain composed, and found herself face to face with the man who had reshaped her entire future. He was not what she had imagined. Alpha King Damian Wolf stood near a wide window, overlooking the training grounds, dressed simply in dark clothing that carried none of the ceremonial trappings she might have expected from a king. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair, and a face that held more quiet intensity than open cruelty. When he turned to face her fully, his eyes met hers, and something passed between them that Elena had no name for, a jolt that seemed to travel straight through her chest and settle somewhere she could not easily reach. He did not speak immediately. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable, though something in the set of his jaw suggested he was working just as hard as she was to remain composed. "You may leave us, Freya," he said finally, his voice low and steady. Freya bowed slightly and withdrew, closing the doors softly behind her, leaving Elena alone with the man who held her future in his hands. "Elena," Damian said, and the way he spoke her name, quiet and careful, as though testing its weight on his tongue, unsettled her more than any harsh greeting could have. "Your Majesty," she said, keeping her tone even. "I understand I have you to thank for my journey here." Something flickered across his face, and he gestured toward a pair of chairs near the window. "Please, sit. I imagine you have questions." "I have many questions," Elena said, remaining standing. "I would prefer answers before I sit anywhere in your home." A ghost of something like approval crossed his features. "Very well. Ask, and I will answer honestly." "Why me?" The question came out sharper than she intended, but she did not soften it. "My father tells me this was part of a peace treaty, standard terms, a gesture of goodwill between packs, but my guards tell a different story. They say you asked for me specifically, by name. Why would an Alpha King demand a Beta's daughter he has never met?" Damian was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that surprised her. "I did not ask for a hostage," he said, and I did not ask for a bride to be delivered like cargo. I asked for you, specifically, because months ago, at a treaty gathering between our packs, I caught your scent for the first time, and I have not been able to think of anything else since. Elena stared at him, certain she had misheard. What are you talking about? You do not know what a fated mate bond feels like, he said, because you have never experienced it. I did not expect to either, not at my age, not after so many years believing I would rule alone. But the moment I caught your scent across that gathering hall, something in me recognized something in you, and it has not let go since. The words landed like a physical blow. Elena had heard of fated bonds, the old stories passed down through generations of shifters, the idea that some connections were written into the very blood of two people long before they ever met. She had always considered them exactly that. Stories, old tales meant to comfort young pups before bed, not something that happened to real people in the real world. That's not possible, she said. I understand your disbelief, Damien said. I felt the same disbelief myself, for weeks after that gathering. I told myself it was imagination, exhaustion, anything other than what my instincts insisted it was, but it did not fade. If anything, it grew stronger, until I could not deny it any longer. So you arranged a treaty, Elena said slowly, anger beginning to burn through her shock. Specifically, so you could claim me as part of the terms. You used my pack's need for peace to get what you wanted. I would not put it that way. I don't care how you would put it. Her voice rose, despite her efforts to control it. You manipulated a peace agreement to secure a woman for yourself. You let my father believe he was protecting his pack, when really, he was handing over his daughter to satisfy your personal wants. The peace is real, Damien said, his voice steady despite the sharpness of her accusation. Ashwood and Thornhollow needed this treaty, regardless of anything between us. I did not invent a war to force your hand. I simply ensured that when peace was made, you would be part of it, because I could not imagine a future where you were not. You could have asked, Elena said, her voice breaking slightly despite her best efforts. You could have come to Ashwood yourself. You could have introduced yourself as a man, not as a king demanding tribute. Instead, you let me believe I was being sacrificed, traded away like property, while you sat here knowing the truth the entire time. For the first time since she had entered the room, something like genuine regret crossed Damien's features. I worried that if I came to you directly, revealed the bond before you understood anything about our world or our ways, I would frighten you away entirely. I chose the treaty because it seemed the safest path, the one most likely to bring you here without forcing you to make an impossible choice on your own. I see now that I was wrong. I am sorry for the pain this has caused you. Elena said nothing for a long moment, her mind working through everything she had just heard. A fated bond. A king who had waited months, engineering an entire peace treaty, simply to bring her within reach. It should have terrified her. Instead, beneath the anger and the confusion, she felt something else stirring, something she was not ready to name. I need time, she finally said. I need to understand what any of this means before I can decide anything. You will have all the time you need, Damien said. You are not a prisoner here, Elena. Whatever your journey here might have felt like, you may explore the stronghold freely, speak with anyone you wish, and leave whenever you choose. I will not force this bond on you. I only ask that you allow yourself the chance to understand it before you decide it means nothing at all. Elena studied him carefully, searching his face for the cruelty she had expected to find, the coldness that would have made this entire situation easier to hate without complication. She found none of it. Instead, she found a man who seemed as unsettled by his own feelings as she was, a king who had broken his own careful control simply by admitting the truth to her face. I would like to see my quarters now, she said finally. I need time to think. Damien nodded, something like relief passing through his expression, as though he had expected a far harsher response. Of course. Freya will show you to your rooms. If you need anything at all, you have only to ask. As Elena turned to leave, his voice stopped her at the door. Elena, she glanced back. I know this is not how you imagined your life unfolding. I know you did not choose any of this, but I promise you, whatever else you come to think of me, I never intended to make you feel like something to be owned. She held his gaze for a long moment, unable to fully trust the sincerity she heard in his voice, unable to fully dismiss it either. "We will see," she said, and left the room with her mind spinning and her heart pounding, in a rhythm she did not recognize as entirely her own. Elena's quarters turned out to be a suite of rooms on the third floor of the stronghold, larger than her entire bedroom back at Ashwood, with tall windows that overlooked a garden bursting with late summer flowers. Freya left her there with a promise that meals would be brought whenever she wished, and that a bath had already been prepared in the adjoining room. Alone for the first time since leaving home, Elena sat on the edge of the wide bed and allowed herself, finally, to shake. Everything she had believed about her situation had shifted in the space of a single conversation. She had arrived prepared to hate a stranger, to endure whatever cruelty a conquering king might inflict on a woman handed over as tribute. Instead, she had found a man who spoke of fate and instinct, and things she barely understood, a man whose eyes held none of the coldness she had braced herself for. It should have made things easier. Instead, it made everything more complicated. She bathed slowly, letting the warm water ease the tension from muscles stiff after 2 days of travel, and tried to organize her thoughts into something manageable. A fated mate bond. She had heard her grandmother speak of such things once, long ago, describing them as rare gifts given to very few shifters across generations. Her grandmother had never experienced one herself, and neither had anyone else Elena had ever known personally. It had always seemed like a story from another era, something too old-fashioned and too convenient to actually exist in the modern world of treaties and politics and careful alliances. Yet Damien had spoken of it with such quiet certainty, not as a man trying to manipulate her into compliance, but as someone equally unsettled by forces beyond his control. She did not know what to do with that. Over the following days, Elena settled into a careful, watchful routine. She explored the stronghold as Damien had promised she was free to do, walking through gardens tended by pack members, who greeted her with cautious politeness, observing training sessions in the wide yard, where warriors sparred beneath the afternoon sun. She was careful not to let herself grow too comfortable, reminding herself constantly that comfort could easily become another kind of trap. Not everyone welcomed her presence. She first noticed the tension during a meal in the Great Hall, where pack members gathered each evening to eat together at long wooden tables. Elena had chosen a seat near the edge of the room, preferring to observe rather than draw attention, but a woman seated nearby made no effort to hide her displeasure. "An Ashwood girl," the woman muttered to her companion, not quite quietly enough, "brought here to warm the king's bed, while the rest of us bleed for this pack's protection." Elena's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully and turned to face the woman directly. "I did not ask to come here," she said, keeping her voice level despite the heat rising in her chest, "and I have no interest in warming anyone's bed. If you have concerns about my presence, I would rather you voice them to my face than mutter them behind my back." The woman's companion looked startled, but the woman herself only lifted her chin, unbothered by being caught. "My name is Ingrid," she said. "I have served this pack since I was old enough to hold a blade. I have watched our king carry the weight of leadership alone for years, and now suddenly, he abandons careful judgment for some Ashwood stranger because of a scent he claims to remember from a single gathering. Forgive me if I find that difficult to trust." "You are entitled to your doubts," Elena said. "I share some of them myself, if I am honest, but I am not here to take anything from this pack, and I am certainly not here to be spoken of, as though I cannot hear the words." Something shifted in Ingrid's expression, a flicker of surprise at the directness of the response. She said nothing further, though the tension between them lingered, even after Elena returned her attention to her meal. Word of the exchange apparently traveled fast, because the next morning, Freya sought Elena out in the garden, with a knowing look on her face. "I heard you held your own against Ingrid last night," Freya said, settling onto a stone bench beside her. "Was I not supposed to?" "Most people avoid confrontation with her entirely. She has a sharp tongue and sharper instincts, and she has been fiercely loyal to Damien since before he took the throne. She lost her brother in the conflict that placed him in power, and she has never quite trusted anyone who came into his life afterward. That explains her hostility, but it does not excuse it." Freya smiled slightly. "No, it does not. But it might help you understand that not everyone's resistance to you is about you specifically. Some of it is old wounds that have nothing to do with anything you have done." Elena considered that as she watched a pair of songbirds dart between flowering shrubs nearby. How long have you known Damien? Since we were children, Freya said. I was there when his father died, and the pack nearly fractured under the weight of grief and uncertainty. I was there when Damien, barely more than a boy himself, stood before warriors twice his age, and convinced them he could lead them through it. He has carried this pack on his shoulders for a very long time, Elena. I have never seen him care about anything the way he seems to care about you, and that frightens some people who fear it might distract him from his duties. Does it frighten you? Freya considered the question seriously before answering. No. I think it might be the first time I have seen him consider something beyond duty in a very long time. I think that might be good for him, even if it complicates things for a while. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, before Freya excused herself to attend to pack business, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts once more. She found herself, against her better judgment, wondering what kind of boy Damien had been, standing before warriors who doubted him, forced into leadership before he was ready for its full weight. She saw him only briefly over the following days, passing in hallways or catching glimpses of him overseeing training in the yard below her window. He kept his distance, true to his word, giving her the space she had asked for without pressing for more. Yet she found herself noticing small things about him during those brief encounters. The way he listened carefully when pack members brought him concerns, never dismissing anyone, regardless of their status. The patience he showed with younger warriors still learning their forms during training. The quiet respect with which his people treated him, not out of fear, but out of something that looked remarkably like genuine loyalty. It did not match the image she had built in her mind during those long nights before leaving Ashwood. One afternoon, nearly a week after her arrival, Elena found herself wandering near the training yard when a commotion drew her attention. A group of younger pack members had gathered around two warriors locked in an intense sparring match, and Elena recognized one of them as Ingrid, moving with a speed and precision that spoke of years of dedicated practice. Her opponent, a broad young man Elena did not recognize, pressed the attack aggressively, clearly determined to prove something in front of the gathered crowd. Elena watched, fascinated despite herself, as Ingrid deflected blow after blow with controlled efficiency. The match ended when Ingrid caught her opponent's arm, twisted, and sent him sprawling to the ground with a move so quick Elena barely registered it happening. The crowd cheered, and Ingrid extended a hand to help her opponent up, the earlier hostility Elena had witnessed, nowhere in evidence now. You fight well, Elena said, before she could stop herself, drawing closer to the edge of the training yard. Ingrid turned, surprise flickering across her face at finding Elena there. Did you come to watch, or to judge? To watch, Elena said honestly. Though I imagine I could learn something from you, if you were willing to teach. Ingrid studied her for a long moment, something calculating behind her eyes. You fight? I was trained at Ashwood, alongside our pack's warriors. Perhaps not to your level, but I am not helpless. Something almost like respect crossed Ingrid's face, quickly hidden. Prove it, she said, gesturing toward the practice weapons racked along the yard's edge. If you can hold your own against me for even a few minutes, I will reconsider some of what I said about you. Elena hesitated only a moment before crossing to the weapons rack and selecting a practice blade, its edge dulled for training purposes. She had not sparred properly in weeks, not since before the news of her trade had upended everything, but the familiar weight of a blade in her hand steadied something inside her that had felt unmoored since arriving at Thornhollow. The match that followed drew a larger crowd, pack members pausing their own training to watch the Ashwood stranger test herself against one of Thornhollow's most respected warriors. Elena fought with everything she had, drawing on techniques her father's warriors had drilled into her since childhood, refusing to be embarrassed in front of an audience that already doubted her worth. She did not win. Ingrid's skill and experience proved too much to overcome, and within a few minutes Elena found herself disarmed, her practice blade skittering across the packed dirt. But she had lasted longer than expected, landed a few solid strikes of her own, and earned something in Ingrid's expression that looked remarkably like grudging respect. Not bad, Ingrid said, offering a hand to help Elena to her feet. For an Ashwood girl. High praise, Elena said dryly, accepting the hand. Ingrid almost smiled. Perhaps I judged too quickly. Perhaps. It was not an apology exactly, but it was something. and Elena found herself feeling lighter than she had in days as she made her way back toward her quarters that evening, her muscles pleasantly sore, a small victory settling warm in her chest, despite everything else weighing on her mind. She did not notice Damien watching from a balcony above the training yard until she glanced up and caught his eye. He had clearly seen the entire match, and something in his expression, warm and unguarded in a way she had not seen before, made her breath catch unexpectedly. Neither of them spoke. She simply held his gaze for a long moment before continuing on her way, aware of a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the exertion of her sparring match, and everything to do with the way he had looked at her, as though watching her fight for herself was the finest thing he had witnessed in a very long time. That night, lying awake in her wide, unfamiliar bed, Elena found herself thinking not of her anger, or her father's betrayal, or the strangeness of everything that had brought her here, but of the quiet warmth in Damien's eyes as he watched her from that balcony. It unsettled her, how easily he had begun to occupy space in her thoughts that she had not given him permission to claim. She was not ready to trust him. She was not ready to trust any of this, the bond he spoke of, the fate he claimed had brought them together. But for the first time since arriving at Thornhollow, she allowed herself to wonder, just slightly, whether everything she had believed about this arrangement might have been incomplete. The peace Elena had begun to find at Thornhollow shattered on a gray morning nearly 2 weeks into her stay, when a visiting delegation from a neighboring territory arrived to discuss trade routes along the northern border. She had not planned to attend the gathering. Political meetings were not her place, not as an outsider with no formal standing within the pack. But Freya had asked her to help prepare the great hall for the visitors, and Elena, eager for something useful to occupy her hands, had agreed without hesitation. The delegation arrived, led by a broad, heavily built man named Corwin Blackwood, whose reputation, according to the whispers among Thornhollow's warriors, was built on aggressive expansion and a willingness to test the patience of neighboring packs. He entered the great hall with an air of casual arrogance, his eyes sweeping the room with open assessment before settling, inevitably, on Elena. "And who is this?" he asked, his voice carrying easily across the hall. "I was not aware Thornhollow employed such lovely serving staff." The comment landed like a slap. Elena felt her face flush, more from anger than embarrassment, but before she could formulate a response, Damien's voice cut through the hall with a coldness she had not heard from him before. "She is not serving staff," he said, crossing the room with measured, deliberate steps that somehow conveyed more menace than any raised voice could have managed. "She is Elena Voss, and you would do well to address her with the respect owed to a guest of this pack." Corwin's smile faltered slightly, though he recovered quickly. "My apologies. I meant no disrespect. Though I confess, the rumors reaching my territory suggested something rather different about the Ashwood woman's role here." "Then the rumors reaching your territory are wrong," Damien said, his voice still level, but carrying an edge that made several nearby warriors shift uneasily. "Whatever you have heard, you will not repeat it within these walls." The tension in the room stretched thin enough that Elena could feel it pressing against her skin. Corwin held Damien's gaze for a long moment, clearly weighing whether to press the matter further, before finally inclining his head in a gesture that fell somewhere between apology and concession. "Of course, Alpha King, I meant no offense to your guest." The meeting proceeded after that, though Elena excused herself as soon as she reasonably could, retreating to the garden to steady her racing heart. She had faced insults before, had grown thick-skinned over years of pack politics and careful maneuvering, but something about watching Damien step in so immediately, so completely without hesitation, had unsettled her in a way she had not expected. She was still sitting in the garden, turning the moment over in her mind, when Damien found her nearly an hour later, the delegation apparently concluded for the day. "Are you all right?" he asked, settling onto the bench beside her without asking permission, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I'm fine," she said. "I've endured worse insults than that. You should not have to endure any insults at all, not within my walls." His jaw remained tight, the earlier anger still simmering beneath his composed exterior. "I should have addressed it more decisively. I let my restraint outweigh what you deserved in that moment." "You called him out in front of his entire delegation," Elena said. "I would call that decisive enough." Damien was quiet for a moment, studying the garden rather than her, his hands loosely clasped between his knees. "When I was young," he said finally, "before I became alpha, before any of this, my father used to tell me that a true leader protects those under his care, not through grand gestures, but through consistency, through showing up, every single time, regardless of how small the moment seems. I have tried to hold to that principle throughout my rule. Watching that man speak to you the way he did, and knowing I have not yet earned the right to fully claim you as mine, I felt that principle tested in a way it has not been tested in a long time." Elena turned to study his profile, the tension still visible in the line of his shoulders. "You don't owe me protection," she said quietly. "I am not yours to protect, not yet, perhaps not ever." "I know," Damien said, "and yet I find myself wanting to protect you regardless, because the alternative, standing by while someone disrespects you, feels entirely unacceptable to me, bond or no bond." Something in his words settled uncomfortably close to Elena's heart, and she found herself looking away, unwilling to let him see how deeply the sentiment had landed. "Why did your father die?" she asked, changing the subject before she could examine her own reaction too closely. Freya mentioned it, but she did not explain the circumstances. Damien's expression shifted, old grief surfacing briefly before he mastered it. "A conflict with a neighboring territory, before Thornhollow held the strength it holds now. My father led warriors into what he believed would be a straightforward negotiation, and it turned into an ambush. He did not return. I was barely 20, unprepared for leadership, thrust into a role I had spent my entire life training for, but never truly believed I would need so soon. That must have been difficult. It was the hardest thing I have ever faced," he admitted. "For the first year, I doubted every decision I made. I questioned whether the warriors who followed me did so out of genuine belief or simple lack of alternatives. It took years to build the kind of trust and stability this pack has now, and even now, I know how quickly it could all unravel if I make the wrong choice." Elena studied him with new eyes, seeing beyond the composed king who had greeted her that first day, glimpsing instead the young man who had been forced into leadership before he was ready, who had spent years proving himself to warriors who might have doubted his capability. "That is why you were so careful with the treaty," she said slowly, understanding dawning. "Why you engineered peace, rather than simply demanding it. You did not want to repeat your father's mistake." "Among other reasons, yes." He finally looked at her again, something vulnerable in his expression that she had not seen before. "I have spent years being careful, Elena. Careful with alliances, careful with trust, careful with every decision that might affect this pack's stability. And then I caught your scent, across a crowded hall, and every careful instinct I have spent years cultivating told me I could not simply let you go, regardless of how complicated pursuing you might become." "You could have told me the truth from the beginning," Elena said, though her earlier anger had softened considerably, replaced by something more complicated, instead of hiding behind treaty terms. "I know, and I am sorry for the pain that choice caused you." He held her gaze steadily. "If I could undo it, I would find a different way, but I cannot undo it, so I can only try to earn back whatever trust that choice cost me." Elena did not respond immediately, her mind working through everything she had learned about him in the past hour alone. The boy forced into leadership too young, the king who still carried the weight of his father's death, the man who had broken his own careful rules simply because he could not walk away from a bond he had not asked for either. "I am still angry," she said finally, "about how this began. About not being given a choice in any of it. That is fair. But I am willing to keep talking, to keep understanding. That is all I can offer right now." Something like relief passed across Damien's face, subtle but unmistakable. "That is more than I expected, and more than I deserve, after how poorly I handled the beginning of this. Thank you, Elena." They sat together in the garden, as the afternoon light softened toward evening, saying little more, but Elena found the silence between them comfortable, in a way she had not anticipated. Whatever this bond was, whatever strange force had brought her across pack lines to sit beside a king who carried more burdens than she had first realized, she could no longer deny that something real was beginning to take root between them, however cautiously, however slowly. That night, as she prepared for bed, Elena caught her own reflection in the mirror, and studied it for a long moment, searching for some sign of the change she felt happening inside her. She looked the same, and yet everything felt different than it had 2 weeks ago, when she had ridden away from Ashwood, believing herself sacrificed to a stranger's cruelty. She was beginning, cautiously, to wonder if she had been wrong about nearly everything. 3 weeks after her arrival at Thornhollow, a letter arrived for Elena bearing her father's seal, and she carried it to the garden to read alone, uncertain what to expect. The letter was brief, formal in a way that stung more than any harsh words could have. Gareth wrote of pack business, of the treaty's success in easing tensions along the border, of his hope that she was settling well into her new circumstances. He did not ask how she felt. He did not apologize again for the choice he had made. It read like a report delivered to a colleague rather than a message from a father to his daughter, and Elena found herself folding it closed, with hands that trembled slightly with unexpected hurt. She was still sitting with the letter, when Marin's name, scrawled hastily in the margin of a separate small note tucked inside the envelope, caught her attention. She unfolded it carefully, recognizing her friend's familiar handwriting immediately. Elena, the note read, I could not let your father's letter travel alone, without adding my own words. I miss you terribly. The pack house feels quieter without you in it. There is something I think you should know, though I am not certain how to say it gently, so I will simply say it plainly. Since you left, I have overheard things among the council members that trouble me. Talk of debts, old debts, tied to your father's dealings years ago. Debts that grew larger than the pack could easily manage. I do not know the full truth, but I believe the treaty with Thornhollow may have solved more than one problem for your father, and not all of those problems were about protecting the pack from war. Be careful, Elena. Ask questions if you can. I love you, and I hope you are finding some measure of peace where you are. Elena read the note twice, her stomach twisting with each pass. Debts. Old debts that had grown too large to manage. She thought back to her father's face during their final confrontation, the way he had avoided her eyes, the careful way he had spoken of protecting the pack, without ever fully explaining what that protection required. She needed answers, and she knew of only one place she might find them. Freya. When Elena found her later that afternoon reviewing supply reports in a small study off the main hall, looked up with immediate concern at the expression on Elena's face. What's wrong? I need to understand something about the treaty negotiations, Elena said, closing the door behind her before settling into the chair across from Freya's desk. The real terms, not what my father told me, not what Damien has explained about the bond between us, but the actual political and financial arrangements that were made. Freya's expression grew careful. That is a conversation you should have with Damien directly. I am asking you because I trust you will not soften the truth to spare my feelings. Freya studied her for a long moment before setting down her papers with a resigned sigh. There were financial elements to the agreement, beyond the peace terms themselves. Your father's pack had accumulated significant debts over the past several years, debts owed to multiple territories for resources during difficult seasons. Thornhollow agreed to absorb a substantial portion of those debts as part of the treaty. Why would you agree to that? Because Damien wanted the treaty to succeed regardless of the cost, and because absorbing Ashwood's debts strengthened our influence over the border region, without requiring conflict to achieve it. Freya's voice remained steady, though sympathy flickered in her eyes. I do not know all the details of your father's financial situation, Elena. That knowledge belongs to him and to the council that oversaw the arrangement. But I can tell you that the treaty solved problems for Ashwood that went well beyond simple peace. Elena sat back in her chair, processing this new layer of betrayal settling over everything she had already been forced to accept. Her father had not simply traded her for peace. He had traded her, at least in part, to solve a financial crisis he had never disclosed to her, a crisis significant enough that an entire territory's debts had needed absorbing by a rival pack. Does Damien know I did not understand any of this? She asked quietly. He knows the full terms of the treaty, yes. Whether he understood how much your father withheld from you, I cannot say for certain. That is a question for him. Elena thanked Freya and left the study with her thoughts spinning, anger and hurt tangling together into something difficult to untangle. She found Damien in his private study an hour later, going over reports of his own, and he looked up immediately at the expression on her face. Elena. What happened? Tell me the truth, she said, closing the door behind her. All of it. About the debts. About what my father actually gained from this treaty beyond peace. Damien's expression shifted, understanding dawning, followed quickly by something like guilt. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I will explain everything I know." He told her the full story then. The debts Ashwood had accumulated over years of difficult harvests and border disputes. Debts owed to territories far less patient than Thornhollow had proven to be. He explained how the treaty negotiations had revealed the extent of Ashwood's financial troubles that threatened the Pact's stability regardless of any conflict with Thornhollow. Absorbing those debts as part of the peace agreement had seemed, from Thornhollow's perspective, a generous gesture that solved multiple problems simultaneously. "Did you know," Elena asked when he finished, "that my father would present this to me as simple peace terms, without ever mentioning the debts?" "I did not know exactly how he would explain it to you," Damien admitted. "I assumed, perhaps wrongly, that he would be honest about the full scope of the arrangement. I did not consider that he might present it to you in a way that concealed his own role in creating the crisis this treaty ultimately solved. He let me believe I was being sacrificed purely for the Pact's protection," Elena said, her voice tight with anger she could no longer contain. "He never mentioned that he had spent years mismanaging Ashwood's resources, accumulating debts he could not repay, and that trading me away helped solve a problem largely of his own making. I am sorry, Elena. I should have been more direct with you from the beginning about every aspect of this arrangement, rather than allowing you to learn pieces of it through letters and second-hand conversations." Elena pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to steady the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Her father had not simply chosen politics over her well-being. He had chosen to protect his own failures, wrapping them in the language of Pact survival, and had allowed her to carry the weight of a sacrifice that was never as noble as he had presented it to be. "I need air," she said, rising abruptly. "Elena, wait. I just need a moment," she said, softer this time, meeting his eyes briefly before slipping out the door. She walked without direction for a long while, eventually finding herself at the edge of the training yard, now empty in the late afternoon light. She sat on a low stone wall and allowed herself to finally process everything, the layers of betrayal stacking one atop another until she could barely distinguish which hurt the most. Her father's dishonesty, the debts he had hidden, the years of quiet mismanagement that had shaped decisions affecting her entire future without her ever knowing. She did not know how long she sat there before Damien found her again, approaching slowly, giving her space to wave him away if she wished. She did not. "I keep thinking," she said as he settled beside her, "about how certain I was that I understood my own life. My father's choices, my Pact's circumstances, and it turns out I understood almost none of it." "That is a difficult thing to discover," Damien said quietly. "The worst part is that none of it changes anything. I am still here. The treaty still stands. My father's debts are still resolved through my presence in this stronghold, regardless of how honestly or dishonestly he explained it to me." "That is true," Damien said. "But how you choose to move forward from here, that remains entirely yours to decide. Nothing about your father's dishonesty obligates you to feel a certain way about me, or about this bond, or about your life here. You are free to be angry at him without that anger determining anything about your future." Elena considered his words, watching the last warriors finish their evening training routines across the yard. "I think," she said slowly, "that I need to write to my father, not to accuse him, not yet, but to ask him directly for the truth. I deserve to hear it from him, however uncomfortable that conversation might be." "That seems wise," Damien said. "Whatever he tells you, I hope it brings you some measure of peace, even if that peace comes wrapped in continued disappointment." They sat together as the sun dipped lower, the sky shifting through shades of amber and rose, and Elena found herself, despite everything, grateful for his steady presence beside her. He had not tried to fix her anger, had not rushed to defend her father, or minimize what she had learned. He had simply sat with her in it, offering honesty where he could, and space where he could not. "Thank you," she said eventually, "for telling me the truth, even when it was difficult." "You deserve nothing less," Damien said. "Whatever else happens between us, Elena, I promise you honesty. I broke that promise once, at the very beginning, and I regret it deeply. I do not intend to break it again." Elena believed him, she realized, with a certainty that surprised her. Whatever complicated web of politics and fate had brought her to this stronghold, whatever betrayals and half-truths had shaped the path here, she found herself trusting the man sitting beside her more, with each passing day, even as everything else around her grew more uncertain. That night, she wrote a letter to her father, careful and direct, asking him to explain honestly what the treaty had truly cost, and what it had truly solved. She sealed it and sent it the next morning, uncertain what response would come, but certain, for the first time since arriving at Thornhollow, that she was finally beginning to understand the full shape of her own life, however painful that understanding proved to be. The response from Gareth Voss did not come for 11 days, and when it finally arrived, it confirmed everything Maren had warned her about and more. Elena read the letter alone in her quarters, her father's careful, formal handwriting filling 3 full pages with explanations she had waited weeks to hear. He admitted, finally, to the debts accumulated over difficult seasons, to poor decisions made years earlier when a harsh winter had forced him to borrow heavily from neighboring territories to keep the pack fed. He admitted that those debts had grown beyond his ability to repay, and that Thornhollow's offer to absorb them as part of the treaty had felt, in the moment, like the only path that might save Ashwood from complete collapse. He did not apologize for choosing that path. He apologized only for not explaining it to her more honestly from the beginning, and even that apology felt hollow, wrapped in justifications about protecting her from unnecessary worry. Elena set the letter aside, and did not respond for several days, uncertain what words could adequately capture everything she felt. Anger, still, though it had softened into something more like grief. Grief for the relationship she had believed she shared with her father, one built on honesty and mutual respect, when in truth, he had been willing to let her carry the full weight of consequences from choices he had made alone, years before she had any say in the matter. She found herself spending more time with Damien during those difficult days, drawn to his steady presence, in a way that no longer surprised her as much as it once had. They walked the gardens together in the evenings, discussing pack matters, old stories, small pieces of their respective childhoods, that helped fill in the picture each held of the other. She learned that he had a fondness for old maps, collecting them from traders who passed through the stronghold, tracing territories that no longer existed under names long forgotten. He learned that she had once dreamed of becoming a healer before pack duties pulled her toward other responsibilities, and he encouraged her, gently, to consider training with the pack's healers during her time at Thornhollow. "You do not have to decide your entire future today," he told her one evening, as they walked past the training yard, where torches had been lit against the gathering dusk. "Whatever happens between us, whatever you decide about this bond, you are still allowed to want things for yourself beyond any of it." The suggestion settled warmly in her chest, and the following week, she began spending mornings with Thornhollow's head healer, an elderly woman named Odette, who possessed decades of knowledge about herbs and wounds, and the particular ailments that afflicted shifters differently than ordinary humans. Elena found herself absorbed in the work in a way she had not expected, grateful for something that belonged entirely to her, separate from politics and treaties, and the complicated question of her feelings toward the king who had claimed her by name. It was during one such morning, while grinding herbs alongside Odette in the healer's quiet workroom, that the first signs of trouble reached the stronghold. A warrior burst through the door, breathless and urgent, interrupting their work without apology. "Where is the king?" "In the council chamber," Odette said, immediately alert. "What's happened?" "Scouts report movement along the eastern border. Corwin Blackwood's warriors, gathering in numbers far beyond what any routine patrol would require." Elena's stomach dropped. She remembered Corwin's arrogant presence in the Great Hall weeks earlier, the veiled insults he had offered her, the tension that had crackled between him and Damien even as they discussed trade routes with careful diplomatic language. She had sensed, even then, that his ambitions extended beyond simple commerce. She followed the warrior toward the council chamber, without fully deciding to do so, some instinct pulling her toward wherever this crisis was unfolding. She found Damien already gathered with Freya and several senior warriors around a large table covered in maps, his expression tight with the particular focus she had come to recognize as his response to serious threats. "How many warriors?" Damien was asking as she entered. "Scouts estimate at least 300, Possibly more, the messenger warrior reported. Moving slowly, but deliberately, toward the eastern border. They have made no formal declaration, but the movement pattern suggests preparation for conflict rather than routine patrol. Blackwood, Freya said grimly. This has his signature all over it. He has resented Thornhollow's growing influence for years, and our absorption of Ashwood's debts likely reads to him as an expansion of power he cannot allow to continue unchallenged. Damien's eyes found Elena across the room, something complicated flickering across his features, before he returned his attention to the map spread before him. Send word to our allies along the northern border. I want to know if Blackwood has made similar movements elsewhere, or if this focus is specific to us. The council continued for another hour, strategies discussed and dismissed, messengers dispatched to gather more information before any decisions were finalized. Elena remained near the edge of the room, absorbing everything, understanding for the first time the true weight of responsibility Damien carried as king, the constant vigilance required to protect not just his own pack, but the fragile peace he had worked years to build across the wider region. When the council finally dispersed, Damien found her still standing near the doorway, and something in his expression softened, despite the tension still visible in his shoulders. You should not have to witness this kind of trouble, he said. I am sorry it followed you here so soon, after everything else you have already endured. I am not fragile, Elena said, and I would rather understand the danger than be sheltered from it, while it unfolds around me regardless. Something like respect crossed his face. That is fair. Walk with me? They left the council chamber together, moving toward the private study, where they had spent so many evenings in recent weeks, and once the door closed behind them, Elena finally allowed herself to voice the question that had been building since the messenger's urgent arrival. Is this because of me? Because of the treaty and the debts you absorbed to secure it? Blackwood's ambitions predate your arrival by years, Damien said. He has tested Thornhollow's borders before, probing for weakness, though never with numbers this significant. The treaty with Ashwood may have accelerated his timeline, given him a fresh grievance to justify aggression he was likely already planning. But this is not your burden to carry, Elena. Whatever happens now, it stems from choices and rivalries that existed long before you ever crossed into Thornhollow territory. That does not make me feel less responsible. You are not responsible, Damien said firmly, crossing the room to stand before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, the steady strength that had become, somehow, a comfort rather than an intimidation. You are not a weapon I wielded against Blackwood, and you are not a debt to be weighed against the cost of conflict. You are Elena. Whatever comes, that remains true, regardless of what Blackwood chooses to do. Elena held his gaze, something shifting in her chest, warm and unfamiliar, and entirely too large to name yet. I want to help, she said. Whatever preparations need to be made, whatever role I can play, I do not want to sit in my quarters while your pack prepares for danger. Something like pride flickered across Damien's face. I would not ask that of you regardless. Odette will need assistance preparing supplies if conflict comes. Freya can use additional hands coordinating communication between border patrols. There is no shortage of ways you could help, if you are truly willing. I am. He studied her for a long moment, and Elena felt something pass between them that went beyond simple gratitude, a recognition of partnership forming, where once there had only been reluctant obligation. Thank you, Elena, he said quietly. I know this is not the life you imagined when you left Ashwood. I know none of this is fair to ask of you, but I am grateful, more than I can easily express, that you are here. I am beginning to be grateful too, Elena admitted, the words surprising her even as she spoke them, though she found she meant them completely. Outside, the sun continued its slow descent toward evening, painting the sky in colors that seemed almost too beautiful for a moment, shadowed by the threat of coming conflict. Elena stood beside Damien in the quiet study, watching the light shift and fade, and understood, with sudden clarity, that whatever happened in the days ahead, she no longer wanted to face it as a stranger passing through Thornhollow's walls. She wanted to face it as someone who belonged here, fighting for a home she had not chosen but had, somehow, begun to choose for herself. The days that followed transformed the stronghold entirely. Where once Elena had wandered quiet gardens and watched leisurely training sessions, Now every corner of Thornhollow buzzed with purposeful urgency. Warriors drilled from dawn until dusk, supply stores were inventoried and reinforced, and messengers rode in and out of the gates at all hours carrying reports from border scouts. Elena threw herself into the preparations alongside everyone else. Mornings found her in Odette's workroom, learning to prepare wound dressings and pain remedies in quantities she had never imagined necessary, her hands growing steadier and more confident with each passing day. Afternoons she spent with Freya, helping organize the complex web of communication between border patrols, learning the geography of Thornhollow's territory in enough detail that she could track troop movements on the maps spread across the council table without needing constant explanation. "You learn quickly," Freya observed one afternoon, watching Elena mark a scout's reported position on the map with practiced efficiency. "I had good teachers growing up," Elena said. "My father insisted I understand pack operations, even as a woman who would likely never lead warriors herself. I suppose some lessons stuck more than I realized. Your father sounds like a complicated man." "He is," Elena agreed, and left it at that, unwilling to unpack the full complexity of her feelings toward Gareth Voss in the middle of urgent war preparations. Damien, when their paths crossed during those hectic days, always seemed to be moving between one crisis and the next, coordinating with warriors, reviewing scout reports, sending careful messages to allied territories seeking support should conflict truly arrive. Elena watched him from a distance more often than she spoke with him directly, admiring the calm authority he projected, even as tension clearly wore on him beneath the surface. She found him one evening, nearly 2 weeks after the first reports of Blackwood's movements, standing alone on a balcony, overlooking the eastern forest, his shoulders set with a weariness she had not seen from him before. She approached quietly, unsure if he wanted company or solitude, but he glanced back at the sound of her footsteps, and something in his expression eased slightly at the sight of her. "You should be resting," he said, though there was no real reproach in his voice. "So should you," she countered, joining him at the railing. "Any news from the Eastern Scouts? Blackwood's forces have not advanced further, but they have not retreated either. They sit at the border like a held breath, waiting for something. I do not know what he is waiting for, and that uncertainty is more unsettling than an outright attack would be. Perhaps he is waiting to see if you will show weakness, if your allies will abandon you, if your pack will fracture under the pressure. Perhaps," Damien's jaw tightened, "or perhaps he is simply testing how long he can maintain this pressure before my patience breaks, and I make a mistake he can exploit." Elena studied his profile in the fading light, noting the exhaustion he had been carefully hiding from his pack, the weight of leadership pressing more heavily than usual under the strain of possible war. "You do not have to carry all of this alone," she said quietly. "It is my duty to carry it. Duty does not mean you cannot lean on those around you occasionally. Freya, your senior warriors, me, if you would allow it." She hesitated, then added, "Especially me, if you would allow it." Damien turned to face her fully then, something vulnerable breaking through his careful composure. "I have spent years learning to carry burdens alone, Elena. It is not an easy habit to break, even when I want to." "Then let me help you break it," she said, surprising herself with the boldness of the offer. "I am not asking you to hand me your crown or your responsibilities. I am asking you to let me stand beside you while you carry them, instead of standing apart from everyone who might share the weight." Something shifted in the space between them, a warmth that had been building slowly over the past weeks, finally rising to the surface undeniably. Damien reached out, hesitant, and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "Elena," he said softly, "I have tried to give you space, to let you find your own way, toward whatever you feel about this bond between us, without pressuring you toward anything you are not ready to choose for yourself. But standing here now, with conflict looming and uncertainty pressing on every side, I find myself unable to pretend any longer that I do not want you beside me, not simply as a political arrangement, but because I have come to care for you more deeply than I ever expected to care for anyone." Elena's heart pounded, the weeks of careful distance and cautious understanding finally collapsing into something undeniable and immediate. "I have felt it too," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "I did not want to feel it, not after everything that brought me here, not after the anger and the betrayal and the confusion. But somewhere in these past weeks, watching you lead your pack, watching you defend me, watching you carry burdens most people would collapse beneath, I stopped fighting it. His hand remained gentle against her cheek, and she leaned into the touch without deciding to, drawn toward him by something that felt older and stronger than simple attraction, something that resonated in her chest like recognition. "May I kiss you?" he asked quietly, giving her the choice even now, even after everything they had both just admitted. "Yes," she whispered, and closed the distance between them herself. The kiss was gentle at first, careful, as though he still feared she might change her mind, might pull away, and remind him of every reason this connection remained complicated. But Elena did not pull away. She pressed closer, her hands finding the front of his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like months of careful restraint finally breaking loose. When they finally parted, both breathless, Damien rested his forehead against hers, and for a long moment neither spoke, simply breathing together in the quiet evening air. "I have wanted to do that since the moment you walked into my study weeks ago," he admitted, a small, almost boyish smile softening his exhausted features. "You hit it well," Elena said, smiling despite everything else weighing on them both. "I promised you space. I intended to keep that promise, regardless of how difficult it became." "I am glad you finally broke it," Elena said, and kissed him again, softer this time, savoring the warmth that had been building between them for weeks, finally finding its release. They stood together on the balcony until the last light faded completely from the sky, talking quietly of small things, of hopes for a future neither of them had been certain they would share when this entire arrangement began. Elena told him about her mother, gone since she was young, and the way she still sometimes reached for memories that had grown thin with time. Damien told her about the weight of his father's crown, how he had feared for years that he would never feel worthy of it, and how something about her presence had begun, slowly, to ease that particular doubt. "Whatever happens with Blackwood," Damien said eventually, "I want you to know that this, between us, is not something born from the treaty, or the debts, or any political convenience. This is real, Elena. Whatever else complicated our beginning, what I feel for you now has nothing to do with any of that." "I know," Elena said, and found that she truly did believe it, the last remnants of her earlier doubt finally dissolving into something steadier and more certain. "I feel it too. Whatever this bond is, whatever fate decided to bring us together, I am no longer fighting it." They remained on the balcony long after darkness fully claimed the sky, and when Elena finally returned to her own quarters that night, she carried with her a warmth she had not expected to find in this stronghold, a certainty about her feelings that had taken weeks of anger and confusion to finally settle into place. Whatever conflict waited on the horizon, whatever danger Blackwood's gathered warriors represented, she found herself facing it now, not as a reluctant hostage counting days until some imagined escape, but as a woman, standing beside the man she had, against every expectation, come to love. The following morning brought grim news that shattered the fragile peace of the previous evening. Scouts reported Blackwood's forces had begun advancing at last, moving toward Thorn Hollow's eastern border with clear and unmistakable intent. Whatever patience Corwin Blackwood had maintained during the weeks of tense waiting had finally run out, and war, long threatened, now arrived at Thorn Hollow's doorstep in earnest. The stronghold transformed within hours of the scouts' report, every corner of Thorn Hollow shifting into the focused, efficient rhythm of a pack preparing for battle. Elena had never witnessed anything like it, warriors moving with practiced purpose, supplies distributed with calm precision, the entire community pulling together as a single coordinated force, despite the fear she knew many of them carried beneath their composed exteriors. Damien called a full council at dawn, and this time Elena did not stand at the edge of the room, but was invited to sit at the table itself, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by the senior warriors gathered around the maps. "Blackwood's forces will reach the eastern border by midday," Freya reported, tracing the projected path with a steady finger. "Our scouts estimate their numbers at closer to 400 now, likely reinforced by allied territories, sympathetic to his ambitions." "And our numbers?" Damien asked. 300 warriors ready to fight, with another 50 capable of defending the stronghold itself if needed. We are outnumbered, but not without advantages. We know this territory better than they do. We have prepared defensive positions along the likely approach routes. Damien studied the map for a long moment, his expression carrying the weight of decisions that would determine the fate of everyone under his protection. We will not wait for them to reach our walls, he said finally. We meet them at the border, on ground we have chosen and prepared. I will not let Blackwood dictate the terms of this conflict by forcing us into a defensive posture from the start. The council fell into rapid discussion of strategy and positioning, and Elena listened carefully, absorbing the details even as her stomach twisted with growing fear for what the coming hours would bring. When the meeting finally concluded and warriors dispersed to their assigned positions, Damien remained behind, and Elena crossed to him immediately. I want to help, she said. Not just with supplies and communication. I want to be useful in whatever way actually matters today. You will be useful, Damien said, taking her hands in his. Odette needs every capable set of hands prepared to treat wounded warriors as they return. That work matters as much as anything happening on the battlefield itself. I know how to fight, Elena reminded him. I proved that against Ingrid weeks ago. I know you can fight, Damien said gently. But I need you here, coordinating the healers, keeping this stronghold prepared to receive our warriors when they need care most. That is not a lesser role, Elena. It may well save more lives than any blade could in a single afternoon. Elena wanted to argue, some fierce instinct urging her toward the border alongside the warriors preparing to face Blackwood's forces directly. But she recognized the wisdom in his words, understood that her skills served the pack best in the role she had been training toward these past weeks, rather than on a battlefield where her limited combat experience might become a liability rather than an asset. Come back to me, she said instead, gripping his hands tightly. Whatever happens out there, come back. I intend to, Damien said, pulling her close and pressing a kiss to her forehead. I have far too much to live for now to let Blackwood take that from me. The warriors departed within the hour, a long column of Thornhollow's finest moving out through the eastern gate with grim determination etched into every face. Elena watched from the stronghold walls until they disappeared into the tree line, her heart heavy with worry she could not fully voice even to herself. The hours that followed passed with agonizing slowness. Elena worked alongside Odette and a dozen other healers, preparing the great hall to receive wounded warriors, organizing supplies with mechanical efficiency that helped keep her mind from spiraling into worst-case scenarios. Ingrid, who had remained behind to help coordinate the stronghold's defenses in case Blackwood's forces somehow broke through, found Elena during a brief lull in the preparations. You care for him, Ingrid said, not quite a question. I do, Elena admitted, seeing no reason to deny it any longer. Something softened in Ingrid's typically guarded expression. I have watched him lead this pack for years, watched him carry burdens most men would have broken beneath. I have never seen him as steady as he has been these past weeks, since you arrived. Whatever doubts I held about you at first, I no longer hold them. Thank you, Elena said, genuinely moved by the admission from a woman who had once spoken of her with open contempt. Do not thank me yet, Ingrid said, a ghost of her usual sharp humor returning briefly. Thank me after today, once we know what today has cost us. The first reports arrived just past midday, carried by exhausted messengers who rode hard through the gates, with news that the battle had begun in earnest along the eastern border. Elena's hands remained steady as she prepared supplies, but her mind raced with worry for Damien, for the warriors she had come to know during her weeks at Thornhollow, for the fragile peace and future she had only just begun to fully embrace. By late afternoon, the first wounded began arriving, carried on makeshift stretchers by warriors who had fought through the worst of the fighting and needed immediate care. Elena threw herself into the work without hesitation, cleaning wounds, applying dressings, offering what comfort she could to warriors frightened and in pain despite their training. The Great Hall, once a place of quiet meals and careful diplomacy, transformed into something closer to a battlefield hospital, the air thick with the scent of herbs and the low murmur of pain carefully endured. She did not have time to think about her own fear during those long hours, her focus narrowing entirely to the immediate needs before her, one wounded warrior after another requiring her full attention. It was well into evening, the great hall lit by dozens of lanterns against the encroaching darkness outside, when a warrior burst through the doors with news that made Elena's heart stop entirely. "The king has fallen," the warrior gasped, barely able to catch his breath from the hard ride back to the stronghold. "He took a wound, defending the eastern flank. They are bringing him now." The room seemed to tilt around Elena, every other concern collapsing beneath the weight of those 5 words. She forced herself to remain steady, to keep her hands from shaking, even as terror clawed at her chest with a ferocity she had never experienced before. "How badly?" Odette demanded, already moving to clear space at the center of the hall. "Bad enough that he could not walk on his own. They are carrying him now, should arrive within the hour." Elena did not remember consciously deciding to prepare the space Odette indicated, her hands moving through the motions of gathering supplies, while her mind remained fixed on a single, desperate hope. He had promised to come back to her. She held on to that promise now with everything she had, refusing to let herself imagine any outcome other than his survival, even as the hours stretched into the longest of her entire life, waiting for the warriors to finally carry their wounded king through the stronghold gates. When the warriors finally carried Damien through the stronghold gates, Elena's carefully maintained composure nearly shattered entirely at the sight of him. He lay pale and unmoving on a makeshift stretcher, a deep wound along his side, soaked through the hastily applied bandages, his breathing shallow but steady. Freya walked beside him, her usual composed expression cracked with visible worry, directing the warriors carrying the stretcher toward the space Odette had prepared at the center of the great hall. "What happened?" Elena demanded, falling into step beside them, refusing to let panic overtake the steady hands she would need in the coming minutes. "He led the charge against Blackwood's central position," Freya said, her voice tight with restrained emotion. "One of Blackwood's warriors caught him, with a blade meant for someone else. He kept fighting for nearly an hour after the wound, refused to fall back until the position was secured. He only collapsed once the immediate threat had passed." They reached the prepared space, and Odette immediately took charge, her decades of experience evident in the calm, efficient way she assessed the wound and began issuing instructions. Elena worked alongside her without hesitation, her earlier terror channeled into focused, purposeful action as they cleaned and treated the deep gash along Damien's side. "The wound is serious, but not immediately fatal," Odette said, after several tense minutes of work, "provided infection does not set in, and he rests properly, to allow proper healing. Shifter healing will help considerably, but he lost significant blood before receiving treatment." Elena remained by his side through the rest of that long night, refusing every suggestion that she rest or allow others to take her place. She held his hand as Odette finished treating the wound, as fever began to rise despite their best efforts, as the long hours stretched toward dawn, with no certainty of what the coming day would bring. News filtered in throughout the night regarding the battle's outcome. Thornhollow's warriors, despite being outnumbered, had held their prepared position along the border, using their knowledge of the terrain to devastating advantage. Blackwood's forces, having lost significant numbers and momentum once their leader's central charge had been repelled, had ultimately retreated as darkness fell, unwilling to continue the assault without the element of surprise they had originally counted on. It was, by every measure available, a victory for Thornhollow. But sitting beside Damien's fevered, unconscious form as dawn approached, Elena found it difficult to feel any sense of triumph. "He will recover," Odette assured her sometime near sunrise, checking the wound again and finding the fever, though still present, no longer climbing as dangerously as it had hours earlier. "Shifters are resilient, Elena, and he is stronger than most. Give him time and proper rest, and he will return to himself." Elena nodded, though she did not fully relax, until she saw the first signs of improvement herself, Damien's breathing steadying, the fevered tension in his features easing slightly, as morning light began filling the great hall. She remained beside him through that day and the next, leaving only briefly to eat or rest when Freya or Ingrid insisted, always returning to his side as quickly as duty allowed. On the 3rd day, his eyes finally opened, and Elena, who had fallen into an exhausted doze in the chair beside his bed, woke immediately to find him watching her with a weak but genuine smile. "You stayed," he said, his voice rough from days of fevered silence. "You promised you would come back to me," Elena said, tears she had held back for 3 long days finally spilling freely down her cheeks. I was not about to let you break that promise without a fight. I would not dare, Damien said, reaching for her hand with a strength that was returning even as they spoke. How fares the pack, Blackwood? Freya can give you the full report once you have rested properly, Elena said, though she could not resist offering the essential news he clearly needed to hear. We held the border. Blackwood retreated after losing significant numbers. Thornhollow stands, and so, thankfully, do you. Relief passed visibly across his features, followed quickly by exhaustion that pulled his eyes closed again, though the smile remained on his face, even as sleep claimed him once more. Elena remained beside him, her hand still clasped in his, finally allowing herself to fully believe that the worst had passed. His recovery over the following days proved steady, his natural shifter healing accelerating rapidly, once the fever finally broke completely. Within a week, he could sit up unassisted, and within 2, he insisted on attending council meetings again, despite Odette's stern objections about proper rest. Elena found herself both exasperated by his stubbornness and quietly proud of the resilience that had carried him through such a serious wound. It was during his recovery that the full story of Blackwood's motivations finally came to light, pieced together from captured warriors and messages intercepted during the retreat. Freya presented the findings to the reconvened council, Elena seated at Damien's side, as he insisted on hearing every detail, despite still recovering his full strength. Blackwood's ambitions extended well beyond simple border disputes, Freya reported. He had been in secret negotiations with several smaller territories, promising them protection and resources in exchange for support against Thornhollow, hoping to fracture our regional influence before it grew any stronger. The treaty with Ashwood and the absorption of their debts accelerated his timeline because it demonstrated exactly the kind of expanding influence he feared and resented. And Ashwood's role in this? Damien asked. Was Gareth Voss aware of Blackwood's intentions when he negotiated the original treaty? There is no evidence he knew, Freya said. His decisions appear driven entirely by his own pack's financial crisis, not by any awareness of Blackwood's ambitions. Whatever criticism his choices deserve, conspiracy with Blackwood does not appear to be among them. Elena absorbed this information carefully, some small measure of relief settling alongside her continued disappointment in her father's dishonesty. He had made poor choices, hidden crucial truths from her, allowed her to believe a simpler story than the reality warranted. But he had not, at least, conspired against the very pack that had ultimately protected her, and fought to preserve the peace his debts had helped secure. Word of Ashwood's financial troubles, and the full circumstances surrounding the treaty, eventually reached the wider Council of Allied Territories, and the consequences for Gareth Voss proved significant. Stripped of much of his political standing among the regional alliance for the dishonesty surrounding his negotiations, he retained his position within Ashwood itself, but lost the broader influence he had once held across pack politics. Elena received a final letter from him weeks later, this one carrying genuine remorse rather than careful justification, an acknowledgement, finally, of the pain his choices had caused her. She did not know if she could fully forgive him, not yet, perhaps not for a long while. But she found, reading his final letter, that she no longer carried the same sharp anger that had defined her earliest days at Thornhollow. Time, and distance, and the life she had begun building for herself within these walls, had softened the edges of that particular wound, even if it had not fully healed. As Damien's strength continued returning, and as Thornhollow settled back into its familiar rhythms following the successful defense against Blackwood's forces, Elena found herself increasingly certain of the path she wanted her life to follow. Whatever complicated circumstances had brought her to this stronghold, whatever betrayals and half-truths had shaped the journey, she had found something here she had not expected to find, a purpose in her healing work alongside Odette. A fierce, hard-won friendship with Ingrid, who had become one of her closest confidants within the pack. A partnership with Damien that had grown from reluctant obligation into something she recognized, with quiet certainty, as genuine love. One evening, nearly a month after the battle, as Damien's recovery finally reached completion and the pack celebrated with a modest gathering in the Great Hall, he drew her aside toward the same balcony where they had first admitted their feelings for each other weeks earlier. "I have been thinking," he said, taking her hands in his, "about everything that brought you here. The treaty, the debts, The circumstances neither of us fully controlled. I know this began as something you never chose for yourself. It did, Elena agreed. But it did not end that way. No, Damien said, something warm and hopeful lighting his eyes. It did not. And I find myself wanting to ask you something, not as a king claiming what a treaty promised him, but as a man who has fallen completely in love with a woman who chose, eventually, to stay of her own free will. Elena's heart pounded as she watched him lower himself slowly to one knee, still favoring his healing side slightly, and produce a simple silver ring that caught the evening light. Elena Voss, he said, will you choose me? Not as tribute, not as treaty terms, but as your own choice, freely made. Will you be my mate, my queen, and my partner, in whatever this life brings us next? Tears filled Elena's eyes, though these carried none of the grief and confusion that had marked her earliest days at Thornhollow. These tears carried only joy, certainty, and the profound relief of finally, fully choosing a future she wanted with her whole heart. Yes, she said, pulling him up and into her arms before he could even finish rising. Yes, I choose you, Damien, completely, and without any doubt remaining. The news of Elena's engagement to Alpha King Damien Wolf spread through Thornhollow territory within days, and preparations for a formal ceremony began almost immediately, the pack eager to celebrate a union that had, against all odds, grown from political arrangement into something the entire community had come to genuinely support. Elena spent the following weeks immersed in preparations unlike anything she had experienced before. Freya took charge of organizing the ceremonial details, drawing on generations of Thornhollow tradition to craft a celebration worthy of the pack's king and his chosen mate. Ingrid, surprising Elena entirely, offered to stand as one of her closest attendants during the ceremony, the earlier hostility between them having transformed completely into genuine friendship over the months since Elena's arrival. I never expected this, Elena admitted to Ingrid one afternoon, as they walked through the garden discussing final details for the approaching celebration. When I first arrived here, I could not have imagined any of this. Not the bond with Damien, not this pack becoming something I would call home, and certainly not you standing beside me as a friend, rather than an adversary. Life rarely unfolds the way we expect, Ingrid said, a rare warmth softening her typically guarded expression. I judged you too quickly, based on old wounds that had nothing to do with who you actually were. I am glad you gave me the chance to see past my own assumptions. Word also arrived from Ashwood in those weeks, a formal letter from Gareth Voss requesting permission to attend his daughter's ceremony, along with a smaller, more personal note that Elena read alone in her quarters, her emotions complicated but no longer entirely bitter. He wrote of his pride in the woman she had become, his regret for the pain his dishonesty had caused, and his hope that she might, in time, find room in her heart to forgive him fully, even if that forgiveness could not arrive immediately. She wrote back granting his request to attend, uncertain exactly how their reunion would unfold, but willing, finally, to take the first careful steps toward healing a relationship that had fractured under the weight of hidden debts and unspoken truths. Some wounds, she had come to understand during her months at Thornhollow, could not be rushed toward healing. They required patience, honesty, and time, 3 things she now possessed in abundance within the life she had built for herself. The ceremony itself took place on a clear autumn afternoon, the Stronghold's gardens transformed with flowers and ribbons in Thornhollow's traditional colors, pack members from every corner of the territory gathering to witness their king claim his mate before the full community. Elena stood at the entrance to the garden, dressed in a simple gown that Freya had helped design, her heart racing with anticipation, rather than the fear that had defined her arrival months earlier. She caught sight of her father among the gathered guests as she began the walk toward where Damien waited, and something in his expression, humble and genuinely proud, in a way she had rarely witnessed from him before, eased a portion of the lingering hurt she still carried. They would need more time to fully repair what had broken between them, but this moment, at least, offered a beginning. Damien waited at the garden's center, dressed simply but powerfully, his eyes finding hers the moment she appeared, and holding steady throughout her entire approach. Whatever nervousness she might have felt dissolved entirely under the warmth of his gaze, replaced by a certainty so complete it felt like coming home. The ceremony itself was simple by design, Thornhollow tradition favoring meaningful words over elaborate ritual. Damien spoke first, his voice carrying easily across the gathered crowd, honest and unguarded in a way few had likely witnessed from their king before. When I first caught Elena's scent months ago, he said, I understood immediately that fate had given me something I had never expected to find. But it was not that first moment that convinced me she was meant to stand beside me as my queen. It was every moment since. Her strength when she arrived here believing herself betrayed by everyone she trusted. Her courage in choosing to understand, rather than simply hate what she did not initially comprehend. Her fierce dedication to this pack, evident in every wound she has treated, every hand she has held through difficult recovery. I do not simply love Elena, because fate decreed our bond. I love her because of exactly who she has proven herself to be. Elena, her own voice steady, despite the emotion swelling in her chest, spoke next. I arrived at Thornhollow, believing I had been traded away, sacrificed for peace I never chose. I have learned since that fate rarely announces itself clearly, and that the life we build matters more than the circumstances that first bring us together. Damien has shown me, every single day since my arrival, that partnership built on honesty and mutual respect can transform even the most complicated beginning into something worth choosing again and again. I do not stand here today because a treaty demanded it. I stand here because I choose this life, this pack, and this man, completely and without reservation. The ceremony concluded with the traditional exchange of vows, and as Damien finally kissed her before the full assembly of Thornhollow's pack, Elena felt the last remaining doubts from her difficult beginning here dissolve completely, replaced by a certainty that filled every part of her being. The crowd's cheering rose around them, warm and genuine, a community celebrating not merely political convenience, but a bond they had watched grow into something real over the difficult months since her arrival. That evening, as celebrations continued throughout the stronghold, Elena stood with Damien on the same balcony where he had first kissed her, where they had first admitted their feelings for one another, amid the looming threat of war. The garden below glowed with lantern light, laughter and music drifting up from the celebrating crowd, and Elena found herself overwhelmed with gratitude for a journey that had begun in such pain and confusion, yet had led her, ultimately, to exactly where she belonged. Any regrets? Damien asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they watched the celebration continue below. None, Elena said, leaning back against him with complete contentment. I arrived here believing myself a sacrifice, traded away against my will. I am leaving that fear behind entirely tonight. I am not tribute, Damien. I am your queen, chosen freely, standing here because I want to be exactly where I am. My queen? Damien repeated softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. Chosen not by treaty, but by love. Below them, the celebration continued long into the night. Warriors and healers and pack members of every station, gathering together to honor a union that had begun as political necessity and grown into genuine devotion. Elena watched it all with quiet joy, understanding fully now that the life she had once feared as a cruel sentence had become, instead, the greatest gift fate had ever offered her. She had arrived at Thornhollow a stranger, traded away by a father, desperate to solve problems he had never disclosed, prepared to hate the king who had claimed her by name. She left that fear behind completely on this night, standing instead as Queen of Thornhollow, bound not by obligation, but by a love that had grown stronger through every trial they had faced together. The Alpha King had waited for her, patiently, honestly, through every difficult step of their journey, and Elena Voss had finally, completely, chosen to stay.